Good morning. It is Wednesday, November the 6th. Good to have you with us. I'm Todd Duplantis, and you're watching Up to the Minute. We are live this morning at the HCCTV studios on this Wednesday. Midway through the week, the weekend is in sight. Don't give up on it yet. Dr. Alana Pagal, the communications director from our Northwest College, joins me as my co-host on Wednesdays. Good to see you, Alana.
Good morning, Todd.
It feels like it's been the longest week ever, and we're only on Wednesday.
I cannot agree more. And yet it's the shortest weekends ever, right?
I know. Last weekend it was like Saturday was here, like poof, what happened? It's Monday morning. How did that happen? But yeah,
Exactly.
we're halfway through the week and the weekend is in sight. But we've got a great show for you today. Before we get to today's guests on this Wednesday, we want to welcome everybody who's watching us live this morning on Facebook Live and YouTube. You can join us every Monday through Friday, to 10 a.m. most Mondays through Friday when HCC is in session. And Lana, they can always catch us on social media and our cable channel as well.
That's correct. We are live on the Houston Community College District Facebook page, not HCC, and on YouTube. We're also on X, LinkedIn, and on HCC TV at noon, 5, and 10 p.m. Monday through Friday.
Okay, Lana, you're going to be talking to those next two guests. It's Gaming Wednesday, and we're visiting now with Kyna Stys, Director of Education and Museum Programs at the National Museum of the Pacific War. That's a mouthful. And then Heather Tolliver, who is a nonfiction writer. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
So for Gaming Wednesday, I guess for Gaming Wednesday, people are wondering, what does the museum and a writer have to do with games? Well, you're going to learn the link today between World War II and your favorite superheroes. Stick around for that. That sounds pretty interesting. We're glad to have you both with us. Lana is going to be with you in the next 10 minutes. Okay, first, though, we're going to introduce our first guest. A recent State of the College Chancellor, Margaret Ford Fisher, presented a bold vision for HCC in the metaverse. Today, we're talking with Dr. Crescida Jacobs, a history and humanities professor already using virtual reality in her classes. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jacobs.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, so give us an overview of your Immersive History Museum project and how that works.
Sure. Well, so my Immersive History project is a student-created virtual museum that focuses on the content of my History 1301 course. So that's early U.S. history up to the Civil War in the 19th century. And what I have my students do is I have them work together in groups throughout the course of the entire semester to create a virtual museum space that is dedicated to a marginalized group of people in U.S. history. And so these students choose the group they want to work on, and then throughout the course of the semester, they are finding primary source artifacts that would go a long way to describe what that particular group of people was going through in U.S. history, and then they create the museum space using those primary source artifacts.
Are they allowed to pick anything in history up to the Civil War period, or how does that work?
Yes, so the course is basically divided into 4 historical periods. So we start in the pre-colonial period, and then we have the colonial period and the Republic period, and then the 19th century. And so as students are learning, because this is a freshman level course, so as they're learning the facts of history in each of those time periods as we move through the course of the semester, then they're creating their museum space to reflect that time. So for example, this week we're talking about the middle of the 19th century and all the dynamic things that are happening in history at that time. And so if my students are working on, say, the Women's Museum, then they're going out onto the databases or to other museum spaces that have already curated such great artifacts, and they're finding the artifacts that they think speak best to what the women are going through at that period. And so these could be maps, they could be diaries, they could be photographs, any sort of primary source. The students have the freedom to choose what they think highlights the people at that time.
We've done stories with like the Smithsonian and I know Colonial Williamsburg and various institutions across the states that have somewhat immersive websites that do this similar type of thing. Are there plans that maybe in the future that you can connect with major museums as an outreach or student programs that the students can have their works tied to these institutions?
Wow, that would be the dream, right? The idea is, most of the freshmen in my class are not history majors. They're looking to do other things. My job, I think, is to have them sort of understand the value of museum spaces and other public histories, but mostly to see the value that they have as historical actors, right? I want them to sort of see themselves as important historically. I tell my students over and over, right? Our names may not ever be in a history book, but our lives have so much value and we have so much power in our artifacts and sources. And so, getting the opportunity for students to sort of see the value of social history or to see the value of public history, that's really the primary goal for now. This is only my second year to do the project. So I would welcome a project that would want to partner with what my students are doing with open arms. That would really be the next level.
Now, I understand you had some collaborators here at HCC that have helped you out with this.
Oh, absolutely. Right. I could have never made my vision for this museum space come to life on my own, right? I'm not the most tech savvy, historian that's ever been at HCC. And so it was really important early when I was thinking about this project, right? Thinking of a way to really engage my students with historical artifacts on a real level, something that they could have that was tangible, that would give them the skills that I wanted them to have also. And so I wasn't even sure it was possible to create this virtual museum space. So of course I reached out immediately to my co-creator on this project. That's Dr. Brenda Quintanilla. She's the regional manager for the Institute of Instructional Engagement and Development. And she really helped me bring what I was wanting to create to life. She created basically a blank museum space, kind of a warehouse, if you will, with walls. And then the students go in there during my class time. We go to the computer lab, and some of Dr. Quintanilla's staff, particularly Norma Alfaro and Audrey Jones, they're sort of my technology partners. And so anytime my students are in the lab, Miss Jones and Miss Alfaro and Dr. Quintanilla are there to support them. This is different from some of the other VR projects that we're seeing across the college, because this is a student created project, right? The students don't just walk around in the space and learn. They're there creating the space that, is open to visitors. It's a web-based program. And so you could go in and see. Right. And I could have never done this without the help of all of these wonderful people who are supporting my students, troubleshooting the technology and that type of thing.
Let me ask you this. I know the students create this on their own. You give them some guidance. Have there been certain topics that have surprised you, ones that you can throw out there that you're like, wow, I never thought of it that way?
The first thing that surprises me is that it works, right? That this was a project that I could think about that could be realized. And the second thing that always surprises me is how much fun my students have doing this, right? They don't realize the levels of learning that are really happening, in the finding and the analysis of these primary sources. And so when my students give me feedback and they say things like, Dr. Jacobs, I'm enjoying learning about history, then to me, that is, that's a win, right? That's students are sort of getting to see history from the ground up, and that the real world skills that they're encountering as they work on the software, as they use the goggles, as they have to do all of these different things, is really what it's all about. And then, I think it's really cool that the students are learning a lot of this through their own research. So, we have the textbook, of course, and my lectures, of course, but sometimes seeing the artifacts for themselves and taking a moment to think about what real people were experiencing in a historical time has been the most valuable and surprising thing to me. And I am so happy to keep this project going as long as the students are engaged and interested in learning history this way. I don't mind continuing to evolve my practice to give them that real world experience.
We've got less than a minute, but I imagine you're sharing this with other faculty members as well.
Yes, so I'm a member of Faculty Academy here at HCC. And so my Faculty Academy community of practice is focused on immersive environments and the use of VR in the classroom. And so we meet once a month. Any interested faculty who would like to talk about virtual projects or talk about the metaverse is welcome to join me through the link in Faculty Academy. And we're closing up this semester. Of course, our last meeting is in November, but we will be starting a brand new community of practice for the spring. And so any faculty member is welcome to join our community of practice on virtual reality.
Congrats on the project. We wish you continued success. Dr. Crescida Jacobs, HCC Professor of History and Humanities. Thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too. Now we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Dr. Lana Pagao is going to interview a couple of guests who are talking about the connection between World War II and superheroes. Stay tuned. We're back in 60 seconds.
At Houston Community College, we make your lessons matter. Open the door to real-world education, where passions become careers. Find out more at hccs.edu and let your success take flight.
That one day at PE when they were like yelling at me, and then you just linked arms with me. I don't think you know how much like that helped me. I finally like knew that I had somebody.
And we are back with Kyna Stys, Director of Education and Museum Programs at the National Museum of the Pacific War, and Heather Tolliver, a nonfiction author. They are our Gaming Wednesday guests. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kyna, can you give us an overview of the National Museum of the Pacific War and the webinar series, including the upcoming comic book edition?
Absolutely. I love to talk about the museum. I am from the National Museum of the Pacific War. We are located in Fredericksburg, Texas. We are about 5-6 acres of museum. We have different areas, including our George Bush Gallery, which is that comprehensive story of the Pacific Theater in World War II. We also have a Pacific Combat Zone that tells a story of the TBM Avenger, the PT boat, and we have a battlefield where we do living history programs. This past Saturday, we just had a battle reenactment and used a flamethrower, had a tank. You got to see it in person to really appreciate how amazing it is. And we also have the Nimitz Gallery that tells the story of Admiral Nimitz, which is why our museum is here in Fredericksburg, because he was born here. And we do understand that Fredericksburg is not the easiest place to get to. So we do have virtual programs like our webinar series. And this is a way for us to engage with audiences of all ages with different topics. It could be battles 1 month, but it could also be home front stories or people you've never heard of. We're looking for those stories that really connect with you and make you see World War II in a new lens. And what a better way to do that than comic books? They are such an interesting way to look at World War II and what people were living in the 1940s. And this month, I'm very excited to have Heather as my guest because she's also my sister. The history nerd runs deep in our family, but I'm very excited to have her. And you can register for this webinar on our website, pacificwarmuseum.org. And I think you'll be surprised about how much World War II influenced comic books and vice versa.
I can imagine. I always, when I see the superhero comics, yeah, it's very influenced by World War II. So, Heather, I did not know you all were sisters. Welcome.
Thank
Heather,
you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us a little introduction to the comic book industry?
I can. So, uh, in the 1930s, leading up to the creation of the superhero genre in the comic book industry, um, they were looking for cheap entertainment because we're coming out of the Great Depression. There's not a lot of money going around. And so comic strips, the ones that were in just the regular newspapers, they decided to group those together, print them on cheap pulp, and sell them for like a nickel. And those were really popular. And eventually they ran out of comic strips. And they're like, oh, now we need some new ideas for this. And at the same time, you had a group of people that were underemployed, and those would be first generation Americans born to Jewish immigrants. You had a lot of writers and artists that were not able to get employment at like newspapers or magazines that were seen as a little bit more reputable. And it was out of that need for both content and a place to work that kind of came together on the Lower East Side of New York and created the comic book industry. And so we see the first comic, what we call the first superhero comic, would be Action Comics #1, which introduces Superman, and that was in 1938. And that's when they would call like the beginning of the superhero comic books.
So why were comic books so popular during World War II? And why do we see so much of the European theater, but not the Pacific?
They were really popular because one, they were cheap. They were kind of intended to be disposable. And as we start heading into the beginning of the war effort in the US, there were paper shortages, paper rationing, but they were printed on really cheap pulp paper. And so people would buy them, read them, and then just hand them to the next person. And so they were easily passed around. And that's kind of where the popularity came from. And one of the reasons that the most famous of those heroes, so like Superman, Captain America, Batman to a point, Wonder Woman to a point, the reason you see more of them in the European theater is because this industry was created by Jewish writers, artists, and publishers. And like I said, they were first generation Americans born to Jewish parents that escaped Eastern Europe. And those were the things they were concerned with. Even before the US entered the war, you see things like, well, in Action Comics #1, that was 1938. There's not a supervillain in that for Superman to fight. He actually exposed war profiteering on behalf of Congress people. And that was one of the things that he was fighting against was war profiteering leading into what was going on in Europe. Captain America's first issue came out in the spring of 1941. And in that, you see Captain America punching Hitler in the face, and this was before the US had actually even entered the war. So the Jewish influence behind the beginning of the comic book industry can't really be understated. And a lot of those stories, especially in those characters that persevere, were based on the European front.
So how did comic books have a big impact on the home front?
Well, comic books are kind of an interesting form of media because they come out pretty regularly, and they tend to reflect what is happening at that time. They're a little bit of a snapshot in time. And so you would see, characters like Captain America. A lot of his comic books were set in the European front. And in fact, at one point in the war, the artist for Captain America was also fighting on the European front. And so a lot of his experiences get kind of rolled into those comics. But they were also used as like a rallying point for people on the home front. to see these heroes fighting the good fight. And then other times you would see these heroes being used to sell war bonds, being used to just drum up support for the war effort at home. They would promote paper rationing and all these other things that were really important for people on the home front to do. And then on the other side, another important aspect of boosting morale on the home front is the Wonder Woman comic. Wonder Woman, occasionally they would show her on the front, but mostly her stories were at home. And it would be fighting against things like price gouging and food shortages, helping women, discuss these ideas about feeding their families. But also Wonder Woman kind of pushed these ideas of women supporting the war effort by working jobs and taking on roles like WWII and like a few different things to kind of get in the ideas of people at home that this is what we need women to do now.
I teach humanities and I do teach about comics, but I teach it more as art. Why should we study comics?
I think it says a lot about the time period in which they were created, and it kind of perpetuates itself. A lot of people talk about comics as, like Greek mythology. I kind of see it more as like folklore. Like every new writer comes in and they change the story a little bit. But Superman still is from Krypton. He still has parents from Kansas, and they just tell the story a little bit differently. And I think that as these stories change, they fight different battles, but they kind of fight them with the same values, right? The superhero genre has a few, a few hot points, right? Like usually a secret identity, usually a costume, but a social justice agenda. That is like what superheroes have in order to be considered a superhero. And I think that is like the thread that runs through them. They tell us what we care about at any specific point in time. I've seen comics where, there were comics in the 70s that talked about women's liberation. There were comics in the 60s that discussed the civil rights movement. At one point, Black Panther fought the Klan, like the actual Klan. It wasn't, it wasn't a euphemism or anything like that. And I love them because they are like that, because they so quickly change, because they generally come out every month or every couple of months.
Right.
Like you see how society changes through those pages.
Thank you, Heather. And
you're welcome.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Kyna Stys, Director of Education and Museum Programs at the National Museum of the Pacific War, and Heather Tolliver, a nonfiction author and our Gaming Wednesday guest. We'll have all your information in our post after the show. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up after a quick commercial break, Todd and I will return with some news and announcements.
At Houston Community College, we make your lessons matter. Open the door to real-world education, where passions become careers. Find out more at hccs.edu and let your success take flight.
If you love them enough to crawl into a play place to get them to come down, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Today I'm going to talk to you about physics. Come on in, girls. Let's go. This is the first rocket to get humans to Mars.
It's really tall.
I'm a rocket structural engineer, designing and building parts of the rocket. You are the generation that will be stepping foot on Mars. Do I have a group of astronauts on my hands?
Yes.
You can become a rocket scientist or whatever else you want to be.
Well, good morning once again. Welcome back to HCC's Up to the Minute. Good to have you with us. I'm Todd Duplantis. A few announcements happening across the district. One of them happening tomorrow. It is STEM Day, happening at HCC Central, talking about the ethics of AI. How does that work? What are the principles behind it? What are some of the controversies? They'll have a panel of experts. Students can learn all about it. It's happening tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., Thursday, November the 7th at HCC Central Campus, the Harmon Building. Yes, there will be snacks as well. Always a good time to show up. Check our post after the show for more info. And we also have something coming up Monday on domestic abuse and human trafficking, Lana.
Yeah, our HCC's Counseling and Ability Service is partnering with Aid to the Victims of Domestic Abuse, and it's offering the intersection of domestic abuse and human trafficking, and it's a virtual session open to everyone at HCC, and that is Monday, which is November 11th at noon. It's on Teams. Check out our post after the show for more information.
For the sake of time, I want to let you know that spring registration 2025. That's right. Spring 2025. You can register now for it. Go to hccs.edu/apply for more information there. Now, tomorrow's show, we'll have Dr. Colleen Riley, Vice President of Instruction and Student Services. And for Thursday's Family Fun Day, we'll learn how to nurture peace with the Ethereal Gandhi Museum of Houston. Did you know there was a Gandhi Museum in Houston, Lana?
I did. I pass it every day on my way to work.
Okay,
Yep.
I did not know. I met a gentleman at the UN event a couple of weeks ago, told me all about it. They're going to be on the show tomorrow, so tune in for it.
Yes.
Thanks for being here, Lana. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Anytime. Thank you, Todd.
All right, everyone, have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow morning live at 10 a.m.